So this workshop will be recorded primarily for the purposes of any participants who are not able to attend the workshop and would like to view the information later in a recording. Also, joining me today is Tracy Givens, the interim director of the Undergraduate Writing Center. She is going to be monitoring the chat. At any point, if you have questions, please feel free to put those questions in the chat and Tracy can answer them, or she might direct my attention to them if I don't notice them as well. Also, if you feel comfortable, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions at any point if you'd like some further clarification about anything we're talking about. But to make the most of all our time, we're going to get started. Again, thank you for coming. This is Thanking Your Donor. And we are Red Raiders working together. My name is Dustin Florence. I am the program manager with the Writing Centers of Texas Tech. So before we get started, I'd like to introduce you to the Writing Centers of Texas Tech. I hope some of y'all have had a chance to come in and work with us before. If you have not, please know that you are always welcome to come in to work on any writing you are doing while you're a student at Texas Tech, whether it's your scholarship thank you letter, essays for class, job application documents, literally anything you're writing at any stage of your writing process, from brainstorming all the way to revision. We would love to help you come in. We are a judgment-free zone. We are not here to assess your writing or evaluate you in any way. We're merely here to really help you become the best written communicator you can be. We have 3 writing centers at Texas Tech. We are really lucky to have 3 writing centers. It's a very, many universities do not have 3 writing centers as we do. We have the Undergraduate Writing Center, which is for undergraduate students, and you can have 30 or 50-minute tutorials. We have the Graduate Writing Center for graduate students as well as postdocs. They have 50-minute synchronous online tutorials. And we also have the Online Writing Center, where you can submit a document and get asynchronous written feedback if that's what you prefer, rather than sitting down to have a conversation. So just to let you know about those different services we have. In addition, the Writing Centers also offer a number of workshops. The Undergraduate Writing Center offers workshops on many topics, you know, foundational to writing that undergraduates could learn from. And the Graduate Writing Center has a very robust workshop series. They give about 2 workshops a month, including in the summer. I think I'm going to be giving a workshop on abstract writing in the summer, if anybody would be interested in that, but we're still working on that schedule. Just to let you know that we have all those services as well as this workshop where we're talking about writing scholarship letters to thank our donors. Okay, so briefly, I want to talk about the goals for today's workshop. In today's workshop, we really want to understand the scholarship thank you letter's purpose and audience. Anytime we write something, we should always have why we're writing and who we're writing to at the forefront of our mind. That will help you understand what kind of content fits your purpose and audience, what kind of tone you should use, things like word choice, all of those kind of questions. You can really get a better understanding of how to answer those when you think about your writing's purpose and audience. Then we're going to assess your comfort level with writing a thank you letter. Some of you may be very familiar with writing thank you letters. Some of you may have never written a thank you letter at all. So figuring out where you are and how comfortable you are with writing a thank you letter will help us to be able to answer any questions you have about that process. We also want to determine what you already know about writing thank you letters in order to apply that knowledge. Again, many of you may have written scholarship thank you letters or other type of thank you letters before, that you can apply some of those, some of that knowledge that you have to the task at hand to write a scholarship thank you letter. We're going to consider how you can organize a thank you letter. I'm going to offer one very common organizational structure, which is basically a chronological structure. That's not the only structure that is effective for thank you letters. It is a very common structure, however, and it's pretty easy to implement. So it's one that I would suggest. Then I'm going to introduce a brainstorming technique for generating and evaluating the content of your thank you letters. So jumping into the purpose and audience for thank you letters. The primary purpose of a thank you letter is obviously to say thank you, which sounds very obvious and like it doesn't even need to be stated. But remember, when we're saying thank you, we also want to be genuine in our thanks, to express genuine, authentic emotion, which is a little bit more difficult, right? One thing you can do, however, is reflect back on the situation when you first learned that you were awarded a scholarship, the emotions you were feeling at that time, possible relief, knowing that maybe some financial difficulties had been lifted, some really genuine gratitude towards someone for helping you. If you reflect back on those emotions, that will help you connect again to enable you to say thank you in a really genuine, authentic way. In your thank you letter, you're also presenting yourself, but you're presenting your professional or your scholastic self. As most of us know, and all of us will know if you think about it, you have many selves that you present in interactions throughout the world. For example, the self that you present to your best friends when you're hanging out is very different than the self that you present when you're discussing a topic with your professor, which again will be different than the self you're presenting when you're saying thank you to your donor in the thank you letter. We also want to reassure the donor that investing in you is a good idea. Realize that the donor is investing some of their money in you because they believe in your education. They believe in Texas Tech as an institute of higher education. So we want to reassure them that that investment is a good idea. So by writing a very effective, very thoughtful thank you letter, that will reassure that donor that they have given the money to the right person, to the right cause. And along that same lines, by writing an effective thank you letter, you will help Tech maintain the relationship with the donor. As you can imagine, if donors receive some less effective or less thoughtful thank you letters over time, that might change their opinion about where they should give their money and whether donating to Tech really is the best investment for them in terms of promoting higher education. So by writing very effective, very thoughtful letters that really are genuine and do present a very scholastic self, you will be helping Tech to maintain those relationships and helping your fellow Red Raiders. Okay, so let's think briefly about our audience. Who are the donors that we're writing to? If you have a clear picture in your mind of the kind of person who a donor is, then that will help you make decisions about what kind of content and what kind of tone to use when you're writing to your donors. So for the most part, you can expect your donors are professional people. This is not 100% necessarily the case, but it is largely the case. So people that donate to universities are usually people who have higher professional degrees, lawyers, doctors, successful business leaders, other types of professors, people who understand the value of higher education. Also, these donors are older than yourselves for the most part. As you can imagine, in order to be able to accumulate enough wealth that you could donate to a cause like a scholarship you know, that takes some time. So these are people who have spent their life working, and now they're hoping to give back. But when you address them, realize you're not addressing someone around your same age. You're addressing someone who is quite a bit older than you. So the respect that you're going to show, the tone that you're going to use is going to be different than that you would use for someone around your same age. These donors are very generous, so don't forget to mention their generosity. Don't forget to mention how their generosity is helping you achieve your goals. They are most likely educated. Again, not necessarily, but most of our donors are highly educated. Again, very professional people. So the vocabulary that you're going to use when you address them and the type of topics you're going to talk about in your letter, the type of topics you're going to address in your letter, are going to be those that you would address towards an educated audience. So you can use more formal language. You can talk about different programs and things that someone who has been through higher education would understand. Those are the kind of considerations you can keep in mind when you're writing your letter. And of course, they're interested in promoting your education. So you can always come back to that theme, you know, thank you so much for promoting my education. Thank you so much for promoting my professional development. They're interested in that, so they would love to hear about how their funding is enabling you to do exactly that, to become an educated professional person. Okay, whenever we write anything, we want to think about our writing process. When we're writing something, we go through different stages of writing process, and these stages could like reoccur. But whenever we write, we always have to start thinking about our approach to the writing and our experience with writing this certain kind of genre. So having said that, just a show of hands, or you can type yes or no in the chat. How many of you have written a thank you letter so we can understand what kind of experience people have with, you know, writing thank you letters? So I can see some hands getting raised. That's great. The people that have written thank you letters, I'd like you to reflect back on your experience with writing thank you letters. Now, you may have been writing a thank you letter for a scholarship, similar to what you're doing this semester. Some other times you would write thank you letters. When you received gifts, it's very common to write a thank you letter. For example, when you invite friends or relatives to your high school graduation and they come, they usually give some kind of gift. That's also a very common time to give thank you letters in this culture. So understanding the situations in which we usually write thank you letters will also help you understand how important this skill is. And that you're not only doing it when you get a scholarship, although you always should do that, but we also use thank you letters, for example, when you have an interview with someone for a job. After you have that interview, it's a really good idea within 24 hours to write a thank you note. That may just be an email. If it can be an actual letter, that's great, that's even better. But you do want to recognize that someone gave up some of their time in order to talk to you. So this is a skill that you're going to use throughout your professional life. So don't think that this is just something you're learning right now just to write this letter. This will really serve you in the future as well. For those of you that have written a thank you letter before, I'd like you to think about these questions, like who did you write to, right? Was it a scholarship donor? Was it a relative? Was it a teacher? Someone who wrote a recommendation for you? How smooth was that process of writing that letter, right? So what did you go through? What steps did you go through when you were writing the process? How effective was the letter? And more importantly, what made it effective or ineffective? And a question that I didn't put on here, but it's honestly probably the most interesting question. How do you know your letter was effective or not, right? So I may have written a letter to a donor, and I'm really comfortable writing letters, so I was able to write it really smoothly. You know, I brainstormed some content, wrote it, had a friend look at it, gave me some feedback, revised, proofread it, done. And I'm pretty sure the letter was very effective, but how do I know? And how can I judge what made it effective or ineffective? Well, one thing I would say, when you send out this letter in the world, it's unlikely, although not impossible, that the donor will respond to you. Sometimes the donor will. If they'd like to, you know, maintain communication with you, they might write you back. But in the majority of cases, you probably won't receive a letter back. So you won't really know if the letter was effective or not. But what you can always do is share your letter with other people that you trust. And that gets us into thinking about the writing process, like the pre-writing, the drafting, and then the sharing. So that's a step that sometimes people forget or neglect to do, just feel that they maybe don't have time to do that. But it's a really crucial step to get some feedback about how effective your letter is. Of course, you can share it with, again, family members, friends, classmates, but you can also share it with us at the Writing Center. And honestly, that's what we do all day, every day. That's what we're trying to do, is to really respond to writing and give really effective feedback about, you know, what are you doing really well? What could you change to make it even more effective? And those kind of things. So if you're worried about your letter being effective, I would really encourage you to come by and see us at the Writing Center. You're always welcome. But yeah, when we're writing our letter, we don't want to neglect any of the parts of our writing process, because we really want to make sure that we're writing the best letter we can. And you don't want to just, you know, do a little bit of thinking and hammer out one draft and try to send it out. That's not really showing the level of gratitude that you should be showing to someone who really is enabling your education in a big way. So do share it, do revise it, do proofread and edit it. And we're going to talk about some tips for revising, proofreading, editing in this workshop today. Okay, so revising is probably the most important part of the writing process, to be honest. It's the part that you might spend the most time on, especially for longer documents and for very high stakes, very important documents. I will usually revise them several times. But when I'm revising, I want to look at higher order concerns before I look at lower order concerns. Higher order concerns are things like content, organization, and clarity. So in terms of my scholarship thank you letter, I want to make sure the content really is expressing who I am as a professional self and a scholastic as a student. I want to make sure my organization makes sense, right? That I have some organization. I'm not just throwing sentences one after the other kind of randomly. And then my sentences are very clear. They're clearly stating my meaning. After I've kind of established all of those important elements, then I'm going to look at my lower order concerns. I'm going to check my grammar, check my punctuation, make sure my spelling is good, make sure I'm using the proper title of my college, make sure I'm spelling my donor's name correctly. All of these kind of also important things. But you want to make sure your content, organization, and clarity are there first, so that you don't waste time kind of editing and proofreading things that you might take out later. For example, if I write my first draft and I make sure all my spelling is correct, punctuation is correct, and then I get some feedback from a friend or from the Writing Center, and I find out, oh, some of this content really isn't appropriate, or it's not expressing myself as I really want to. And I end up throwing that content out. Well, now I spent a lot of time proofreading it, and it didn't even end up in the final document, right? So that's why I would always suggest focusing on higher order concerns and then lower order concerns in that order. Okay, so a little bit more about my background in terms of scholarship thank you letters. I've tutored many scholarship thank you letters in the Writing Center, but I've also had experience editing scholarship thank you letters. So I've read over 1,000 scholarship thank you letters at Texas Tech easily. So I've noticed some common higher order concerns in scholarship thank you letters that I'd like to tell you about. So maybe you can avoid these or have these concerns in mind when you're drafting your letters. So inappropriate content is by far the biggest one. If you had a fantastic vacation with your, roommates and you went to, Europe and you had a great time, it was very fun, that's fantastic. But unless you can kind of show how you grew professionally or you learned something from that experience, it wouldn't really be appropriate content to share with your donor. Because again, remember, we want to present things that are helping us grow as a professional, grow as a student with your donor. The next thing I've noticed is inappropriate tone. So again, tone is often related through things like word choice. So using more spoken type words rather than more academic, more formal words. Pay attention to using things like a lot of contractions. It tends to make your tone sound more conversational. So we want to avoid those in the thank you letter. Again, this isn't an academic document, so the tone doesn't need to be like something you would read in a journal, for example. But it's also not the way you would speak to one of your classmates, right? So you want to find that balance with that tone. I have seen letters that are completely lacking in organization, or the organization was very unclear. Like it was unclear why certain sentences were grouped together, or I've seen letters that were just blocks of text without paragraph organization at all. So when you're writing your letter, we're really going to focus on, having clear paragraphs that have a clear focus and making sure all the content in that paragraph is contributing to that focus. And that's going to make your letter a lot easier to read and a lot easier for your donor to understand. You don't want to repeat content from a previous letter for a couple of reasons. You might think, I want to write a really good letter. I know I wrote a really good letter last year, so if I use that letter again, that'll be great, right? I mean, I already know that letter was great. The problem with that is you are not the same person as you were last year. You have grown. You have learned a lot, especially at this time in your career. Every year you are developing a lot. You are learning a lot more about your discipline, about what it means to be studying music. You're learning a lot from professors, from classmates, from experiences you're having with organizations, from working with others. So you want to present yourself as you are now. So you really want to revise any content from a previous letter to take into account those changes that have happened. Also, in the case that you're sending the letter to the same donor that you have sent before, if you send the exact same letter, that's going to come off as impolite, as rude, to be honest. Like you didn't want to put in the time to update the letter. And you may not intend, and I know you wouldn't intend to offend your donor, but you would run the risk of doing that if you just send out the letter again and again. It seems as if you don't care about this process that much, and we don't want to make that kind of impression. Finally, and this one is really tricky, and it's a really common concern that I've seen, but it's thanking Texas Tech or thanking, for example, the College of Visual and Performing Arts for the scholarship rather than thanking the donor for the funding. What I mean by this is I've seen some letters where they'll say, dear donor, thank you so much for giving me the blank blank scholarship. Now realize that your donor is not involved in the decision of you getting a scholarship in one way or another. That's the the university and your college awarded you the scholarship. They're the ones that decided you are an excellent student, you deserve this scholarship. What your donor did was provide the funding to get for that scholarship. So rather than saying, thank you for giving me such and such scholarship, you would want to word it like, I was given such and such scholarship. Thank you so much for providing the funding for this, or thank you so much for supporting the School of Music. That's a good way to say it as well. Just to show like you understand that distinction, that the donor actually isn't the one who gave you the scholarship. I realize that's kind of a strange distinction, and if you haven't had the experience of writing a thank you letter before, that may be difficult to understand. So does anyone have any questions about any of these higher order concerns that we're talking about? And in specific, that last one. All right, later, if you have any questions or if you think of one, please feel free to ask at any point. So now looking at some lower order concerns in thank you letters. A big one would be misspelling the donor's name. It's really easy to, double check this. You don't want to misspell someone's name because, again, it comes across as if you're not taking the proper concern. You're not respecting your donor in the way you should. I realize you wouldn't mean it that way. It wouldn't be intentional, but it would come off in that way. So double check those things. It's happened before. We don't want it to happen in our letters. Things like fused sentences. So having too many ideas in one sentence and they're not connected in a grammatical way, that can be confusing. We want to avoid that. And then kind of the opposite idea, having a sentence fragment. So having a sentence that doesn't convey a complete idea. Those are also very common lower order concerns. Misusing a word, especially those common words like there, and there, or it's and its, those words that sound the same, but they're spelled differently and they mean different things. Pay attention to those. I've been guilty of that. We all have, but we can all, proofread our documents, paying special attention to those kind of issues. Capitalization, specifically capitalizing, right, like the official name of your school or program. So for example, when you're talking about your college, you would want to use the official name, the J.T. and Margaret Talkington College of Visual and Performing Arts. You want to use the name that's, on the website, the official name of your school, and again, the official name of your program. When you do that, that's like, in the same way you would capitalize your name, you would capitalize that name, right? Because that's the name of a school or the name of a program. So that's another thing to think about, and another common issue that you might encounter when writing your letter. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the organization and structure that you might use when writing your letter. At this point, if you have the template that was provided to you by the School of Music, you can look at that. But I've also taken parts of the template and put them in the PowerPoint for you to refer to in case you don't have that template. But if you do happen to have it beside you, you can refer to that and be thinking about how you would put your content into that template as we're talking about this organizational structure. Okay, so first we have to introduce ourselves, right? So we have to do an introduction. You want to, again, right off the bat, say thank you. Tell the donor who you are. Again, your scholastic self, so who you are as a student. So that's how we usually begin our thank you letter. In the template, you can notice, you introduce your name, thank your donor, tell your donor a little bit about where you are in your program, really expressing that genuine emotion, that genuine gratitude. You can do all of those things in your introduction. So if I was thinking about writing an introduction, a first draft might be something like, I wanted to say thank you for the scholarship. I was very relieved to get it. So here I say thank you. which is a key component of a thank you letter. I'm expressing some of my emotion. But as I look at this and get some feedback and revise it, I realize it's missing some important elements about introducing who I am. Also, the emotion, it seems a little bit dry to me. It's not really coming off super effective, so I have questions about it. So I decided to revise it, make it a little bit more effective, and I might revise it in this way. Dear donor, I was so excited to receive blank blank scholarship. I am a sophomore in the School of Music, and I'm thankful for your support of Texas Tech and the department, whatever department, the School of Music, for example. So here, I really have like some language that conveys more genuine emotion. I also have some specifics that give the donor some context to understand where I am in my program, what I'm studying. So I paint a better picture of myself as a student, and also a better picture of really the gratitude I feel towards the donor. After our introduction, we want to go to our first section. Now, as I was saying, a chronological order really makes sense for a thank you letter. It's a good organizational technique. It's not the only one, but it's the one I'm going to suggest and introduce right now. So in a chronological organization, first I would talk about my past. Notice in your template, you want to talk about your program and your recent past, right? And then we're going to try to integrate that recent past into your present situation, right? So thinking about the past, I like to think of this analogy of a tree, right? The tree has the solid roots that are really our foundation. You can't see the roots, but that's what's allowing us to grow. In a similar way, your past, your donor doesn't see that right now, but you're going to tell your donor about that because it's what enables you to grow into who you are right now. If you're a first-year student, talking about your hometown, where you went to high school, why you decided to study at Texas Tech, what path led you to your major, right? Like, how did you get into music? What is it that you love about it? All of those things make a lot of sense to tell your donor as a first-year student, because that is your recent past. So for example, you might say something like, growing up in a small town of Slayton, Texas had benefits and drawbacks. I love the sense of community, but I missed out on educational opportunities available at a bigger city. This is one reason I'm so excited to begin my studies at Tech with its amazing cultural and educational opportunities. Even crafting it even more to like School of Music, you might be like, with its amazing cultural opportunities such as, the Lovick Symphony Orchestra or whatever else you're interested in about, being at Lovick and Tech. Now, if you're a sophomore, junior, or especially junior and senior, if you're still talking about your hometown and your high school, that's getting a little bit far from your recent past, right? So you want to think about some other content you could put in this first section. And one thing I would suggest is you can always talk about accomplishments. So your recent accomplishments. What did you accomplish last year? Was it, getting a really good GPA, learning some really interesting things in classes, having interesting work experience, whatever it was? Surely you can think of several things that you accomplished last year that your donor would love to hear about, right? So for example, I might say something, last year when I got generous scholarship funding, I was able to take off some hours from a part-time job and use this time to apply for an internship with the Lovick Symphony. This internship experience encouraged me to keep pursuing my goal of becoming a conductor, right? So see how I'm tying that past experience and I'm starting to move a little bit into the present, right? How it's kind of situating my perspective on my present and even my future goals. Now in the second section, we want to move from the past to the present, right? So we want to make those connections. So again, your present, if we're looking at this tree analogy, is like the trunk. It's connected to your roots though, right? So your roots are what is enabling your trunk to grow up. So we want to draw those connections between your past accomplishments and your present endeavors that will be accomplishments, you know, as you work on them. So you can talk about classes that you're taking this semester, right? And what you're learning in them. A job that you have now, or an organization you're in. You can even talk about hobbies, especially if those hobbies really are helping you grow as a person, right? So again, making those connections to how you're developing as a person. So I might like transition into the present some way like this. This academic year has been full of personal growth for me. I was able to dedicate myself to my classes, maintaining a 4.0 GPA. Also, I ran and was elected to student government, which is providing valuable experience toward my goal of entering public service. Of course, these accomplishments were possible with generous scholarship funding, right? So again, tying it back to like how the donor is enabling what you're doing at this present time is always a good move to make in these scholarship letters. In the third section, we're going to talk about our future. By future, we mean our goals, right? What do we want to accomplish? So in the template, you know, you want to tell the donor about upcoming goals. You know, if you're going to graduate, when you're going to graduate, what do you want to do as a career? Your donor would be super interested in that, right? Tell the donor what you learned from them, right? You know, like from you, I learned generosity. I learned, you know, the importance of giving back to education, whatever it is. Just make sure it's authentic, right? That you really, it's a genuine feeling. Okay, again, pursuing this tree analogy, your future is like the fruits of your work, right? So you've worked long, hard, you spent all this time in school, but now you're really going to be able to do some great things. That's the fruits of your labor. But these fruits are also the fruits of the donor's investment in you. So the donor invested some money, but now you're going to go out and you're going to make the world a better place. You're going to impact your community. So the donor and all of us are receiving the fruits of that investment. You can talk about academic goals, like I want to maintain my GPA. You know, I want to go to graduate school. If you plan to go to graduate school and you're an undergraduate, definitely tell your donor about that. That's a fantastic goal to have. Applying for scholarship or fellowship funding, presenting research, or presenting, you know, like, yeah, any kind of presentation you're doing in the community, your donor would love to hear about that. So for example, you might say, I hope to build on the strong academic foundation I received at TTU by researching piano pedagogy at the Texas Tech Graduate School program, right? Or wherever you're going to go. You can also talk about professional goals, like applying for internships. I plan to apply for such and such internship, or I plan to take such and such workshop to develop some skills. All of those are great things to tell your donor about. So for example, you might say, next year I'm taking part in an internship at, I don't know, the Lubbock Ballet. This opportunity will give me the chance to learn from experience in the field and enter the workforce prepared to serve others, right? And then finally, we want to get to our conclusion. In the conclusion, you want to thank your donor again. So say thank you again. Don't worry that you're saying thank you too much. It's a thank you letter, so you probably cannot say thank you too much. That's the primary purpose of the letter. Also tell your donor how you're going to be, how you plan to be a great success. Not necessarily like I'm going to be a great success, I'm going to be a millionaire or anything like that, although that's fine, that's great. But how you're going to be a great success and impact your community, how you're going to do great things for others. So I might conclude, you know, something like, I would like to take this chance to thank you again for all the opportunities your support has provided for me. Your generosity will be a model for my future endeavors, right? No, that's kind of a basic structure that you can follow. And again, the School of Music has provided a really fantastic template for you to look at. But now you want to develop some content to put in that template, right? Because that's just a structure, right? So you need to have some content that really shows who you are in the best light and really shows your donor that you're a great person to invest in. So here's one brainstorming tool that I might use. So imagine I was, an undergraduate student in the College of Music, in the School of Music. And I'm trying to think of, I know I want to use this chronological order. I want to talk about my past, present, and future. So I'm going to think of 3 things in my past, 3 things in my present, 3 things in my future to talk about. So in the past, I was a section leader in high school marching band. I was first chair flute of the all-region ensemble, and I collected comic books. Right now, I'm a member of the University Symphony Orchestra. I work at Best Buy, and I'm a member of Mu Phi Epsilon. And in the future, I want to be the conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic, or maybe become a high school band director, and I hope to make $80,000 a year. Okay, so I generated this content, but how do I know it's effective? Again, thinking back on our writing process, my best bet is to find someone to give me some feedback. So I go to you. You are my friend. You are my classmate, my colleague. And I'm like, I really need some help here. Can you give me some feedback on this content, please? Can you tell me, what do you think is really effective content? What is probably ineffective and you would just suggest taking it out? What could be effective if I made some changes? What could I talk about more or clarify more and it would be effective? So at this point, I'd like to get some feedback from all of y'all. Again, feel free to write in the chat. Also, feel free to unmute yourself. First, let's talk about the past. Is there anything in my past experience you would suggest I modify in terms of my content?
I'm not sure what collecting comic books would have to do with like your future as like music and your education in music.
Yeah, fantastic. I totally agree. Looking at that now, I'm like, yeah, it doesn't really relate to music in any kind of obvious way, right? I might be able to relate it in some way to like, I have other interest in the arts, but it would be difficult, right? So yeah, I think that's really good feedback. I'm going to take that out. Now, how about my present? Anything you would think I could modify there? Okay, I see we're getting some answers in the chat here. I'm going to look at those real quick. The part about working at Best Buy. Yeah, I agree. Nothing wrong with working at Best Buy. And I think I could make it work, but I would have to modify it, right? Maybe I could talk about what I'm learning at Best Buy or some skills I'm getting by working there that would be applicable to my future goals, right? But yeah, that one definitely needs some work. I agree. And then how about the future? Anything you would suggest I take out or change there? Okay, I see we're getting some chat. Oh, that's really good. That's going back to the present though, right? But it is good to, including the fact that you have a retail job as a full-time student, it shows you're a hard worker, right? And it shows, like you said, you are able to juggle work and school. You're able to, prioritize things and do more than one thing at a time. So those are really good skills to talk about. So yeah, that one just needs some modification and it could still work. Yeah. How about my future though? I feel like there's something in my future that might come off in a way I don't want it to. I'm a little bit worried. Yeah. The money one, right? There's nothing wrong with making $80,000 a year. That's fantastic, right? But remember, our purpose with the thank you letter is to show genuine gratitude and to present ourselves like our scholastic self, our professional self. So rather than focusing on the money, which seems a little bit inappropriate, yeah, focus on what you're going to do, right? Yeah, and high school band directors in Lubbock, at any rate, are not going to make that, right? But yeah, you could focus on being a high school band director and the impact you're going to have on that community, right? And how you're going to love that. And as far as conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic, unless you can back that up, I mean, that's a very difficult position to get, right? You would probably want to modify that. So maybe a conductor of a vibrant orchestra in a metropolitan area where I can make strong connections with the community and do a lot of outreach, right? That would be a better way to say that rather than, you know, like conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic. Anyway, also a fantastic dream, but there's just probably a better way to approach that kind of goal, where we emphasize more about, you know, we want to be a conductor in a big city, but for the reason of, you know, like promoting music education or promoting appreciation of the arts in the community, right? In the wider public. So again, just with some slight modifications, you can make that a lot more effective of an example. Okay, I realize we're running out of time. I appreciate so much the feedback that I've gotten from y'all, and I'm deciding to apply it. So I applied the feedback. There you go. My letter is going to be much more effective now. So in the same way, if you have any questions about your content or you'd like someone to look over your letter, please come see us in the writing centers. We would love to talk to you about exactly these kind of issues. Now, I know we covered a lot there. Does anyone have any other questions before I get to the exit survey portion of our workshop? Any outstanding questions that I wasn't able to address in the presentation, or anything that was unclear in the presentation that you would like me to talk more about? Okay, I see we have some talk in the chat. Okay, great. If you do have any questions, we're still going to be on here for a little bit. Now, what I'd like you to do now is we have a brief exit survey. It should only take a couple of minutes. We'd like you to fill it out. And this is one way that we'll be able to record your attendance at the workshop for the School of Music in terms of like the School of Music's requirements. So if you fill out this this survey, and we ask that you do, that will guarantee that you are recorded as having been at the workshop. And again, it will not take long. I cannot, okay, I need to end recording. I was trying to minimize and it's telling